This is Janet Lanier with a video tutorial on how to make your own harp cover. You have a beautiful lever harp and now you want to protect it from the elements as you take it from place to place sharing your music. But there aren't many small harp covers on the market and you want something unique or symbolic of your individual style, yet affordable. If you have a sewing machine and basic sewing skills, you can make your own unique harp cover. To show you what my basic plan is for making a harp cover, I'd like to show you the first cover I ever made. It's made of a textured vinyl fabric and has double fold bias tape for trim. The cover has two basic parts to it, an upper yoke area and an attached skirt that overlaps around the column. The cover slips over the harp quickly and easily. Notice the length of the skirting. It will not drag on the ground and pick up dirt that could get on the harp when the cover is removed. I came up with this wrap skirt pattern because I wanted to have a way to pick up the harp securely. With the cover on the harp, I grabbed the sound hole in the back through the cover and then reach in between the split skirt area to grab the column with my other hand. If I would try to pick up the harp column with my hand outside of the cover, there is a chance that the harp might slip under the fabric. The split skirt option allows me to get a secure hold on the column and the harp is still protected from the rain. There are lots of materials to choose from, but I recommend looking at the upholstery section of the fabric shops. You can save a lot of money by using a remnant if you can find one with enough yardage. I particularly like using the vinyl fabrics because they can be wiped clean with a damp cloth and they repel the rain. If you don't want vinyl but still want the rain protection, you might experiment with spraying the fabric of your choice with a Scotchgard protection. You should also select a fabric that doesn't give off a lot of lint or has a rough texture on the reverse side. As you can see on the back of this particular piece of vinyl from my first harp cover, it is smooth and doesn't have a texture that could scratch the harp wood or snag on the string end points. This is the fabric I will be using for the tutorial. Once again, it is vinyl and has this great diamond stitching pattern with a gold detail to it. The fabric is 58 inches wide and has a smooth backing. I purchased 2.5 yards of it. If your harp is larger than 29 strings or the fabric you choose is not as wide, you will need to take that into consideration. It is best to overestimate how much you'll need. You could always use the leftover material for other projects. I will cover how to estimate the yardage in a few minutes. I'm using bias tape to trim the edges of the skirt and a beautiful gold braid trim to cover the seam where the skirt attaches to the yoke. There are so many beautiful trims on the market. You could even use fringe here. On the first harp cover I showed you, I used this bias tape only, but I thought this time I'd like to add a little pizzazz to the cover by using the gold trim. Also, in my first harp cover, I used a double fold bias tape and it worked fine, but on the new cover I'm using a single fold and I liked that better because it had a cleaner looking edge. You have lots of choices in deciding your harp cover color scheme. The yoke and the skirt fabric can be the same or of different coordinating materials. The trim can blend in or contrast with the fabric. Whatever you choose, you'll have a one-of-a-kind harp cover. Here are the costs for the cover I will be making for this tutorial. The black vinyl fabric was on sale and for the 2.5 yards it cost $43.72. Bias tape cost $3.58. The gold trim cost $2.03 for 2.25 yards. And then I had to use black thread and gold thread. And each of those spools would cost $3.51. So the total cost of this cover will be $56.35. If you looked on eBay, you might find similar harp covers that would cost maybe $125. Plus, you would have to pay $30 for shipping. So you save a lot of money and get exactly the color and fabric you like. With this particular piece of fabric, I had an extra step of preparation. The back of the fabric had connecting threads as a result of the machine stitching pattern. So to avoid snagging the harp levers and string ends, I had to clip all of those threads, which took quite some time. If you do have your heart set on a particular piece of fabric with a rough backing, you could add a lining on the inside of the harp cover, and if you want to avoid the snagging of threads on the levers and string ends, you could get away with lining just the yoke area only. There are two different ways to lay out the fabric and cut the pieces. You will be cutting two identical pieces for the yoke, and then one long straight piece for the skirting. Take the 3 measurements of your harp as indicated on this diagram. For the yoke, measure the circumference shown here in yellow and the height shown in red. For the skirt, you'll also use the measurement of the circumference and the height shown here in blue. The fabric I was using was 58 inches wide, and so I could fold the fabric lengthwise, lay the harp down on one end, and trace around the harp for the yoke. My 29-string harp was just the right width to cut the yoke from the Method 1 layout. But if you have more strings or a wider harp, or perhaps your fabric is less than 58 inches wide, you might try Method 2 that I'm going to show you later. In the alternate Method 2, you could spread the fabric in a single layer and fold over one end to allow cutting 2 pieces for the yoke. Whether you use Method 1 or 2, if you choose a one-way design fabric, you will need to purchase extra to allow the fabric to be cut in the correct direction. So lay out your material and fold it lengthwise with the wrong side up. Pin the raw edges of the longest side so that the fabric doesn't slip or slide. Carefully set the harp down with the levers side up on the material near one end. Make sure the bottom of the harp's legs are perpendicular and aligned with the fold of the fabric. If you don't, the fabric pattern in the yoke will not be straight vertically when it hangs on the harp. Using pencil or chalk, trace around the upper area and sides of the harp for the yoke. The bottom of the yoke should come approximately below the point where the sound box connects to the shoulder joint. The question of how much of a distance to draw the chalk line away from the harp will depend. If you want the yoke to be just 2 pieces, like what I had for my first brown harp cover, you should draw the line far enough away from the harp to allow for seam allowances and the thickness of the harp. The thickest part of the harp is in the back where the shoulder and sound box connect. So I would make my outline tracing about 2.5 inches away from the harp. However, for my new harp cover, I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to trace around the upper part of the harp less than 2 inches away. When I pin the yoke together and fit it to the harp, I will have an opening at the back. I'm going to cut a small triangular shape of fabric to fit in between the 2 yoke pieces as an insert. After tracing the upper edge of the yoke, carefully lift the harp off the fabric and finish drawing the bottom of the yoke. The bottom line should be perpendicular with the fold of the fabric. Next, pin the 2 yoke pieces together, right sides together, and try them out on the harp. Adjust where needed. Sew the yoke pieces together. Clip the edges of the seams up to the stitching line wherever there is a curve. This will help the seam lay better. Turn the yoke right side out and try it out on the harp. Adjust where needed. If you're happy with how the yoke fits, you're now ready to work on the skirting. As you can see in the fabric I chose, there is a wide selvage, so I trimmed that to the edge of the diamond pattern. I did this because this is where the yoke and skirting will attach, and I wanted to make sure the selvage wouldn't show outside of the seam. If your fabric doesn't have a wide selvage like this, you can omit this step. Next, estimate where the skirt will attach to the yoke. Since the skirting is going to be like a wrap skirt, there will be an overlap around the column. I started the edge of the skirt approximately 4 inches from the center of the column. This initial pinned edge will be the part of the skirt that lays under the skirt overlap. Turn the yoke and skirt wrong side out and put it on the harp. Start pinning the upper edge of the skirt to the bottom edge of the yoke with right sides together. The final pinned edge of the skirt will overlap approximately 4 to 5 inches from the center of the column. At this point, you might want to trim off some of the excess fabric at the bottom of the skirt so that you can tell how it will drape on the harp. When you're happy with how the cover lays, remove the cover from the harp and sew the skirt to the yoke. The cover is now quite heavy and may be a little awkward to sew on the machine, but take your time, trim seams, and clip curves. Turn the cover right side out and check the fit on the harp. Next, you will apply the bias tape to the vertical edges of the skirt only. Remember, there will be 2 vertical edges of the overlapping skirt to apply bias tape. The inside edge won't be visible when the cover is on the harp, but it will still make the cover more professional looking if you apply the bias tape to it. We will be applying the bias tape to the bottom edge of the skirt later. Some people put bias tape on in different ways. Sometimes they'll sew one edge of the tape to the fabric and then fold it over the fabric again and sew it again. You can apply the bias tape as you like. I was able to apply the bias tape in one step by folding it over the skirt edge and then making one sewing line. Next, position the gold trim to the outside of the seam where the yoke and skirt connect. You may want to pin this in place and hand sew it, but I was able to sew it on the sewing machine without pins. It's a little awkward because the gold trim is right in the middle of all this heavy fabric. I suggest positioning the cover so that the bottom is on the right and the yoke on the left. The wide opening of the skirt will give you more room. Be careful when sewing the trim on the machine so that you don't accidentally catch some of the loose fabric underneath. Sew along the upper edge, left edge of the trim, check it for correct positioning, and then sew along the other edge, the right edge of the trim. Next, position the cover on the harp and pin the bottom hem in place. I put my hem about 2 inches above the floor. This prevents the hem from getting dirty and picking up debris that could fall on the harp when the cover is lifted. Make sure the hem is level to the floor and then trim the excess off. Apply bias tape to the bottom of the hem. Fold over the corner edges of the bias tape to make a clean corner with the vertical edges of the skirting. Your new harp cover is now complete. If you want, you can add some embellishments to the gold trim where the skirt overlaps, or you can leave it just as is. Depending on the material and trim you select, you can use embellishments such as tassels, buttons, jewelry pins, bows, or anything that would give your cover a little personality. When your harp cover is not in use, fold and hang it in the closet using a skirt or a pants hanger. This has been a video tutorial showing you how to make your own harp cover. Please visit my website for more videos and tutorials.